Hi, I'm Tony. I'm an author, presenter at Sky Sports, and years ago I went to the jungle and got ill. Very ill. So this is my podcast adventure to find more energy. It's packed with biohacking, science, health tech, supplements, and some of the most well-known experts on the planet.
This is something I spent 4 months of my life doing with electrodes glued to my head so that you can do a lifetime worth of meditation.
Decide what you don't give a fuck about, which is something you don't care about.
Some of it gets quite out there.
I had some stem cells sent up to my house that I had stored, and then I injected myself with mannitol.
And we even hack hangovers.
Alcohol is poisonous. So is water and oxygen in the wrong dosage.
So that's my podcast, Zestology. Live life with energy, vitality, and motivation. Welcome back to Zestology. This week coming to you live from the Blue Zone. Yeah, I'm away for the week. It's very apt, actually, because I've been talking a lot about longevity on this podcast recently with longevity guests, looking at longevity diets. I know I've been speaking about Dr. Walter Lungo's longevity diet and also Dr. Dale Bredesen, whose recommendations for kind of being flexitarian are very similar to Walter Lungo's. And it all kind of adds up to living a longer, healthier life. And here I am in Greece, which is one of the, some of the islands in Greece are well known as one of the main blue zones in the world where people live extremely long. There's an abnormal amount of centenarians who live here. And it's all a combination of good diet, lots of exercise, eating particular foods, and a great sense of community as well. And I mean, the vitamin D here has got to be something to do with it as well. It's just absolutely lovely to just spend all day, every day outside and having 3 dips a day as well in the sea. I mean, it's just so nice. So kind of getting lots of exercise out here. And in this mad, crazy year, I'm just so lucky to be able to kind of step back from it all. It has been stressful as well, hasn't it, for everybody, I think. And obviously for some more than others. But to be here in Greece, very last minute decision, I have to say. And we had a very sweaty couple of days as well, because it looked like England was going to add Greece to the quarantine list. We were going to have to isolate for 2 weeks when we got back, which wouldn't have gone down brilliantly at Sky. But thankfully, and actually we had an emergency flight booked back just in case. But we were able to cancel that, and here we are for another few days. So live, kind of, from the Blue Zone. This is Zestology. And today's guest is Roman Krznaric, a fantastic guest, really excellent guest. He's kind of, I suppose you'd describe him as a leading public philosopher. And by the way, if it sounds a bit windy on this podcast recording today, I am sorry. I've already recorded this once. It got too windy. I'm now kind of huddled behind a wall to use the wall as a windbreak. It's a beautiful day, but it is quite a windy day. I can see the island of Kalymnos in the distance. And recording this from here. So Roman Krznaric is someone who will ask you to think, be challenged and inspired. And he asks, can you think long-term and delay gratification? How can you not be addicted to the latest tweet, the buy now button, the endless scroll, and delay gratification when you listen to Zestology, you know long-term is going to be good for you. Here he is, Roman Krznaric on Zestology.
When you're writing a book about long-term thinking and how we're going to face the great challenges of our age, whether it's the climate crisis or the threats from artificial intelligence and all that stuff, of course, I think any sane person would have ups and downs. And I certainly did when I was writing this. Some days I would just be feeling incredibly depressed looking at all these piles of reports on climate change from the UN Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change and thinking how little has been done. But on the other hand, right while I was writing the book and researching it, there was incredible action going on. Like my kids, I've got 11-year-old twins, and they were out on the streets with the Fridays for Future movement, climate strikers, marching. They were full of energy and hope and making banners and stuff like that. And so, all the way through, what I've actually found is that there's a whole, in a way, amazing movement of people who are really hooked into really caring about future generations and getting active and energized by it.
I remember when I was at university, I went into the bank to change my bank account, and it was out of protest at my bank having a lot of third world debt and other banks not having that debt, and that's a bit of an oversimplification of what was going on. But I remember the people in the bank were absolutely scathing, and they said, "You're 20, you're idealistic, you won't think like that when you're 40." They were really kind of quite rude to me, and I remember thinking, I bloody will, and I'd like to think that I do still. But is there a kind of problem with people as they get older? They lose that kind of, not only that kind of passion for fighting for what they believe in, but that kind of fighting for other people passion that you have when you're young.
Well, actually, weirdly, on this particular topic of, how we can extend our care for future generations, it's actually the opposite. It's the older you get, the more you start caring. And let me explain a bit about that. Basically, there's this sort of major finding in modern psychology of the last half century, which is when human beings tend to reach sort of mid-age, sometime between 35 and 50, however you measure it, they start thinking about their legacies. In other words, how they're going to be remembered when they're gone. So, we tend to consider, how do I keep the fire of my life burning beyond death? But we go about it in lots and lots of different ways. I mean, some people, like a Russian oligarch, might want to have a wing of the National Gallery named after them, or a football stadium. That's how they kind of have a legacy. They live beyond their scope of their natural life. Most of us, do it through having children, right? And we want to pass on things to our children or grandchildren, whether it's a family wealth or property, or pass on traditions or religion or that kind of stuff. But I think, this book, which is about being a good ancestor, is about painting on a kind of a larger picture where we're caring about people we never know, even outside our own families. But the curious thing about it, I think, is that we can make that connection through the people that we love and we care about. So if you imagine for a moment, a young person you care about in your life, like a nephew or a niece or a godchild or your own children, if you've got them. And then what I do is I then try to imagine them. Like I try to imagine my 11-year-old daughter on her 90th birthday. And I imagine her surrounded by family and friends and loved ones. And I look out the window and see what's out there. And then I imagine someone putting a little baby in her arms. And that's her first great grandchild. And I think, that little baby could live well into the 22nd century. So that future is not science fiction. It's actually an intimate family fact. And for me, I think, one of the ways, as we do get older and we think about our legacies, remembering that connection we've got through the generations is something that's actually really motivating for a lot of people.
Yeah, that was a bit of the book that I really enjoyed, and it's the section about In Search for Waka Papa, which I'm probably pronouncing completely incorrectly, but it was very nice that it's this kind of Maori concept that you represent people who came before you and came after you, and that is something that perhaps we don't do as much. We're not encouraged to do as much in our society as we used to.
Yeah, that concept of, it's actually pronounced, WH in Maori is pronounced with an F, so it's whakapapa, which sounds slightly rude.
Okay, yeah.
But that is how it's pronounced. And it is this beautiful Maori concept that we are, in this great chain of life stretching far into the past and long into the future. And the light happens to be shining here on this moment. And the idea really is to shine the light more broadly. Of course, you're right, in the kind of world that we live in, a sort of very hyper-individualistic world, we don't feel a lot of those connections through the generations. Some people are interested in their family history, but we tend not to sort of feel that those ancestors of ours are in the room with us, or that future generations are in the room with us like Maori people do. Yeah, there's this really great book actually by James Kerr called Legacy, which you may have come across. It's about the New Zealand rugby team, about the All Blacks. And one of the things he talks about there is how they draw on this New Zealand Maori concept of whakapapa, the idea that, they're wearing the jersey, the All Black jersey right now in this generation, but they need to sort of treat it with respect and pass it on to the next generation of rugby players. And that sort of develops for them a sense of community, that they want to, their team to do well now and in the future. And they're going to do everything in order to make that happen. And I think anyone who's part of a community, whether it's a religious community or a sporting community, can feel that sense of wanting to do something for the future generations who are parts of that community. And again, that can sort of drive us to care beyond the boundary of our own egos.
Yes. Yeah. I mean, it's just that's all very well. And then, you kind of think, oh, I haven't brought my recyclable bag with me. I'll just use a few plastic bags. And we kind of lapse back into short-termism again, don't we? It's quite hard to, I mean, I think a lot of people listening to Fuck a Papa and the concept of that would think, great, yeah, I'm on board with that. But then it seems so far in the future, doesn't it? We're looking after ourselves now. It's completely different from climate change in 100 years' time, for example.
Well, I think one of those things is partly these issues are alive with us now. Obviously climate change is hitting communities in some parts of the world now. My kids are worried about it now and what their lives are going to be like in 10 years or 30 years. Are they going to have water? What's going to happen to food security? Things like that. So I think for some people, the issues feel live. Of course, for other people, they don't feel so live because we're drawn into dealing with our everyday problems in life. Here we are in the middle of the COVID, pandemic, and people are rightly worried about, having jobs or losing security and stuff like that. So that brings us into the now. And of course, digital culture brings us into the now, where we're constantly clicking the buy now button and answering the latest text message. But I think behind this is something really interesting about neuroscience, which is this emerging research showing that we're not just wired for short-term thinking, but we're wired also for long-term thinking. And our brains are in this constant struggle, right, between do I party today or save for my pension for tomorrow? Or do I upgrade to the latest iPhone or plant a seed in the ground for posterity? And that first kind of impulse, that desire for short-term rewards and instant gratification, is what I call the marshmallow brain. And that's named after the famous marshmallow psychology test of the 60s, where marshmallow was put in front of kids, and if they could resist eating it for 15 minutes, they were rewarded with a second marshmallow. And lo and behold, the majority couldn't resist. They snatched it. But there's this other part of the brain, which I call the acorn brain. It's the bit that lives sort of the front of your head above the eyes in a part called the frontal lobe. And it's particularly a bit called the dorsolateral prefrontal cortex. And that's the bit that focuses on long-term thinking and planning and strategizing. And humans actually, kind of weirdly, are actually really good at this. I mean, compared to most animals, I mean, a chimpanzee will plan a bit for the future. So they'll get a stick, strip the leaves off to make a tool to stick into a termite hole. But they'll never make a dozen of those tools and set them aside for next week. But that's exactly what human beings do. That's how we save for our kids' educations or for our pensions, or that's why we write song lists for our own funerals. That's how we built the Great Wall of China and voyaged into space. So we actually have this capacity to move from the marshmallow brain to the acorn brain. It's just that we don't tend to focus on that long-term thinking very much. And most of our, I think the world we live in is designed to bring out the marshmallow brain. If you go onto Amazon, there's the buy now button, right? But I like to imagine someone could hack into it and create a new button. So when you click buy now, it actually gives you a bunch of other options like buy in a week or buy in a year or borrow from a friend. And, you get a message in a year's time saying, hey, well, you ordered this a year ago. Do you actually still really want to buy it? And I bet we wouldn't buy more than half the stuff that we think that we really need right here, right now. So I think with a bit of jiggling of the tech, we might bring out more of the acorn brain.
On that theme, you talked about this titanic tussle for our time. And I've long thought that's kind of, probably the biggest issue facing me. When I'm kind of in the moment and focusing on one thing at once, I feel like I kind of get into a real flow state, and I kind of tend to love doing whatever I'm doing, even if it's washing up. But it's very hard to do that, and increasingly hard. And I try to turn off tech every day, but actually that is harder as well now. If I want to get from A to B, I need the sat nav on my phone. And if I want to meditate, I've got a meditation app. And it's harder than ever to kind of get away from tech, really, isn't it?
Yeah. My natural instinct is to be a bit distrustful of tech when it comes to living the good life and being good and feeling good and doing good, because there's so many problems with digital distraction. And, in the same way, if you had a sat nav that always took you to the wrong place, you'd probably never use it. But that's what happens with our phones, right? You go in to try and do something useful, like book a doctor's appointment online, and then you find that you're watching Game of Thrones spoofs over and over again. And,
yeah.
You end up where you didn't mean to be. On the other hand, I think, technology is just a tool. The question is how we're going to use it. And there's some ways I think that we can, at least the future of technology could help us expand our time horizons into the long future. There's, some really great virtual reality technology developing where you can, put on a headset and go for a swim in a coral reef and watch it bleach over time due to ocean acidification, which on one level is sort of incredibly depressing, but another level can be incredibly motivating. And, when it comes down to it, I think a lot of this comes down to the question of, well, what is it that gives us purpose in life? And, the great existential psychotherapist, Viktor Frankl, said, well, what we need is to lead a meaningful or purposeful life is what he called a transcendent cause, a concrete assignment, something bigger than yourself that motivates you. It could be finding a cure for cancer if you're a scientist, or keeping your family business alive, or whatever it happens to be. But for trying to do something bigger than yourself. And I think, at least what I've learned, in this exploration in this book, The Good Ancestor, is actually thinking about creating the world for my children and the whole web of life around them is actually incredibly motivating. And one of the funny things about it, which I've learned, which I really didn't expect, that it's not only about thinking about the world far away, 100 years or 1,000 years in the future. Actually, if we really, really care about future generations, we need to care about the place that we live in, the here and now. I mean, if you think about how animals, other species have survived into the long term for 10,000 generations or more, their trick is this: they don't foul the nest. They look after the place that will take care of their offspring. They live within the ecological boundaries in which they're embedded. But human beings, of course, are really hopeless at that. We use more carbon than the world can absorb. We cut down more trees that can be naturally regenerated. And what we need to do is recognize that actually, if we really want to care about our future generations, we need to fall in love with the earth in one way, to care about rivers and mountains and streams. And that can be a really pleasurable and beautiful thing, to become a custodian of a riverbank. Or even, this country, Britain, has got, millions of gardeners in it who understand the pleasure you can get from planting an acorn in the ground, knowing that tree will never mature within your own lifetime. I used to be a gardener. I used to do that for a living. And it's something that really gives you kind of existential sustenance.
Yeah, absolutely. Just a quick reminder that this podcast is brought to you by Magnesium Breakthrough. Did you know there's one phase of sleep that almost everybody fails to get enough of? And this one phase of sleep is the most important one. It's important for rejuvenation and repair, controlling hunger, weight loss hormones as well, even boosting energy. And this podcast is all about energy. And I'm talking about the deep sleep phase, which apparently almost all of us don't get enough of. I measure it every night on my Aurora ring, and I get very frustrated when I haven't had enough. If you don't get enough deep sleep, you'll probably struggle with cravings and slow metabolism, and maybe even premature aging as well. And a big reason for not getting enough deep sleep is magnesium deficiency. Over 80% of the population are deficient in magnesium. That is why I always supplement with magnesium. Every day. Magnesium Breakthrough. It increases GABA, which encourages relaxation at a cellular level. And I've known for a long time that it just helps me sleep better. Take magnesium in the evening, take a magnesium supplement, it helps you sleep better. Now, before you go out and buy a magnesium supplement, it's important to understand that not all magnesium products are created equal. And in reality, your body needs all 7 forms of magnesium, especially when it comes to sleep. And that is why Magnesium Breakthrough are our podcast partners. And that is why I take Magnesium Breakthrough. I'm taking it every day. Funnily enough, my deep sleep scores on the Aurora ring are better than ever before. So I'm quite pleased with that. I don't want to humbly brag too much, but up to about 2.5 hours of deep sleep every day on the Aurora ring. So, if you would like to try Magnesium Breakthrough, they offer a 365-day money-back guarantee, free shipping on selected orders as well, and you can get 10% off Magnesium Breakthrough by using the code Zestology10. So, 10% off Magnesium Breakthrough by using the code Zestology10. 10. It is the best aid I know for boosting deep sleep. Make sure you go to bioptimizers.co.uk, use the code Zestology10. You can go to bioptimizers.com if you're anywhere else in the world, use the same code, and Zestology10 will help you with your sleep, help you create more GABA, and help you to encourage relaxation at a cellular level. Right, back to the show. That book you mentioned by Viktor Frankl, as you know, I ask everyone to recommend a book at the end of this podcast. That is the most recommended book of all time. It's very good, isn't it? On that theme, I've read a couple of books recently. One by Chris Ryan called Civilized to Death, and another one by, I think it's Ronald Wright, and it's a short history of progress. He talks about various civilizations, and it's quite a sobering message, to be honest, because he looks at various civilizations that have come and gone, including, Rome, and all sorts of different civilizations. And I wonder if it occurred to you that we've kind of passed our peak as a civilization. I like your relentlessly optimistic message, and I'm sorry to keep asking you slightly negative questions, but I sometimes kind of dwell on the negatives when it comes to what we're doing and whether it's enough.
Yeah, I absolutely believe in dwelling on the negatives, and I believe that can be something that motivates human beings and gets us to care. I mean, that book that you mentioned, A Short History of Progress, Ron Wright, is, I think, a really fabulous book because it tells us a truth, which is, as you say, the Roman Empire was born, it flowered, and it died. The Mayan Empire was born, it flowered, and died. The Sumerian Empire was born, it flowered, and died. And this is what is the likely fate of our own global civilization, as he argues, and as I absolutely believe. In my book, I've showed some great research by a guy called Luke Kemp at Cambridge University, where he surveys 98 ancient civilizations like the Roman Empire and the Mayans and the Sumerians, and concludes that the average age of a civilization, the average lifespan of a civilization, is 336 years. So no matter how technologically advanced your civilization is or how big and powerful it is, it ain't going to last, because nothing lasts forever in nature or in the human world. A forest doesn't keep growing forever. It grows and then it peaks and it dies. Your children's feet don't keep going forever. So who are we to think that our civilization can keep just running up a curve of economic growth forever? But to me, knowing that this civilization can't last as it is, it can't keep pumping out the fossil fuels, it can't keep polluting the air, it can't keep, throwing plastics into the oceans for the long term. We can't survive like that. That is what drives me, at least, to think, okay, how do we get onto a different civilizational path? How do we shift our economies to renewables? How do we educate our kids to care about both people and planet in the future? And, that we do have a capacity to do this. I believe in the human species' ability to solve problems. We overcame, to a large extent, the colonialism of the past and the slavery of the past, not completely, but we're pretty good in a crisis. Humans reacted pretty well. New Yorkers after 9/11, or even during COVID. Think of the amazing kind of mutual aid support groups and WhatsApp groups that popped up everywhere during when COVID started, like in the street where I live in Oxford. We hardly ever spoke to each other normally. And then within a few days, we had 100 people on a WhatsApp group, and we were delivering food to, people who were vulnerable and couldn't go out, but we're also swapping recipes for soda bread. And so, we've got this ability to do something different, but it's a big struggle, So, like you, I'll wallow in those massive challenges of rethinking what civilization looks like. But, I'm engaged or like to find myself engaged in the struggle for something different.
It's quite interesting because this podcast tends to look at things that people can do now to help their own energy levels, and wellness levels and health levels and motivation and focus and all the rest of it. This is, obviously that the whole theme of your book is about thinking long term. But I wonder if one of the ways that you can encourage people to help think long term is help them realize that it helps them now as well.
Absolutely. I believe that. I truly believe that. That's why I think Viktor Frankl is very interesting, because, and all those people who recommend it as their favorite book are kind of right, because if we have a goal that's larger than us, it's what gives us meaning in life. It's one of the routes to meaning, to have a transcendent goal. And that goal doesn't have to be, but it can be to care about a future world, the world that our children are going to inherit, and who are we to break the chain of life and leave them a world worse than the one that we inherited. But there's another aspect of it. If you think about where human meaning comes from, I believe it partly comes from having a transcendent goal. I believe it also comes from the quality of the relationships in our lives. And certainly, for me, I think we can develop those relationships not just with people today, but with our children, grandchildren, nephews, nieces, thinking about future generations. That's what that legacy example of the New Zealand, rugby team's all about. It's about feeling part of, a community that exists through time. That's relationship. That gives us meaning in life. And then the third thing I think that gives us meaning in life, apart from having a transcendent goal and having good quality relationships, is feeling that we can make meaningful choices in life. Feeling a sense of agency. And, my previous books have explored all these different areas, but not in particularly thinking about future generations. But actually, we can make choices today which make us feel radically alive. I mean, we can, I like the idea of when I'm going shopping, asking myself, okay, am I being a good ancestor here when I'm buying beans which have been flown in from Kenya? Well, maybe not. Maybe I should buy the British grown beans because they're not pumping carbon into the sky. Am I being a good ancestor when I'm choosing where I'm going on holiday or making other decisions in life? So, and I think whenever we feel we're making choices, when we're not trapped, we get meaning. And then coming back to that final thing, which is almost a fourth aspect of life, which is feeling a connection with the living world. What the great biologist and evolutionary scientist E.O. Wilson called biophilia, the idea of sort of a natural connection with the living world. Well, by falling in love with the forest or an old oak tree or the yew tree in the local churchyard, you feel alive. You feel you care. You feel something beyond yourself. So I think, a lot of this thinking about the future is actually about thinking about ourselves in the present and about what gives our lives sustenance.
What about persuading other people? I feel like society is more polarized than ever, and it certainly in my lifetime appears to be that way. And politics, I know you touch upon that in the book as well. I mean, if you look at what's going on in America and in the UK at the moment, it seems like the two sides, I know there's more than two sides, but the two sides are so far apart and if you're, say, on the right, you almost have a kind of identikit list of responses to lots of different issues, however important. How much do you focus on? I feel like, there's a lot of kind of hand-wringing liberals like my good self who are listening to this and thinking, I'm going to worry about the beans that I buy now and whether they come from Kenya too. But perhaps other people who haven't worried about that so much might need a bit of gentle persuasion. Would you encourage that, or do you think you have to let kind of people make their own discoveries and decisions?
Well, I think what's really interesting about thinking about our relationship with the future is that people across the political spectrum all get it on a fundamental level. The other day, I was giving a briefing for UK members of parliament about this book and talking to them about, the way that our politics is so incredibly short term, and all the MPs, of course, they know that they are trapped in electoral cycles. They can't see more than a few years ahead. They can't even see beyond the next tweet or the latest headline. They get it. But what I found talking to those MPs, and I found this talking to wealthy investment bankers and egotistical advertising executives and whatever, is that when you get down to it and you start talking about particularly the topic of legacy, everybody cares about it in some way. They care about the world that they're going to leave. And of course, some people do have that very narrow, egotistical form of legacy, like wanting to be remembered for their glories. But most people don't actually. And that, I think, goes for left and right, liberal, non-liberal, whatever. And I just think we need to find different ways to communicate with people. And in fact, that's how I've always done it. I mean, my book talks about 6 different forms of long-term thinking, but each of them in a way addresses different audiences. So one type is about getting in touch with deep time, the sense that you're part of this great cosmological history. Human beings have only been here for a couple of 100,000 years, which is just a tiny moment in the great cosmic story, going back 13.8 billion years to the beginning of the universe, 5 billion years forward to the death of our sun. Now, that idea works for some people, but not for others. Equally, there's a chapter in the book about intergenerational justice, that we've actually got obligations to future generations, in the sense that, the idea of the golden rule, do unto others as you'd have them do unto you. Well, I like the idea of an intergenerational golden rule, which is do unto future generations how you'd want past generations to have done unto you. Again, that motivates some people and not others. And then there's that idea of the legacy, which I think can be really, we can switch that on. And in a way, you can almost turn on like a part of the brain. There's this extraordinary research which looks at how much money people leave to charities in their wills. And so in a way, that's leaving something for future generations, for people you'll never know. And on average, people in the UK, for example, leave 6% of their wealth to a charitable bequest. But if you ask them explicitly, if you ask them, would you like to leave a charitable bequest in your will, the number goes up from 6% to 12%. And then if you say to them, a lot of people like leaving, a charitable bequest in their will. Is there an issue about which you're really passionate? And suddenly 17% will leave money. So, and that's across the political spectrum and gender and, all this kind of stuff. So I think there's a lot more we can do. But, certainly, of course, there are differences between people, but we all connect with the future through that idea of legacy.
The ideas you were just talking about, that I don't know if you've ever read Robert Cialdini's books on persuasion.
No, I haven't. Tell me.
Yeah, it's very good. It's one of his 6 laws of persuasion is the law of commitment, where you get someone to make a smaller commitment and then they make a bigger commitment afterwards. So this happens in lots of different ways, but you might ask someone to sign a survey and then they'll sign a survey and all of a sudden they're putting a hoarding in their front garden saying that they're against drink driving or whatever it might be. It's how Hare Krishna used to get a lot of money for their followers by giving a very small little gift and then asking for something bigger in return. And presumably that could be employed in terms of what you were just talking about as well, in terms of leaving money to charity too.
Yeah, I think you can be trying to use those sort of behavioral nudge techniques, the small reward, the slightly larger reward. That works for some people. It works for one of my kids and not for the other, for example. I've got twins, as I said earlier. But I also think it's really important to shift our values, really, because human values have shifted throughout history. In the 18th century, it was normal to think that slavery was okay. People in the Western world thought it was okay. And then through education and campaigning, that changed. At the moment, we think it's basically okay to not care about future generations, right? They don't have any power in politics or in the marketplace or anything like that. But that could change, I think, through education, for example. So I'm really interested in working with schools and different educational curricula of how do we start teaching this kind of long-term thinking, and it's happened I see it in my own kids, that they've had an environmental education, they've gone to local primary school. It's been normal for them to think about the future of the planet in a way that I didn't get when I was at primary school in the 1970s or early 1980s. So I think we've got to shift those values as well as using the behavioral nudge techniques. Yeah.
And great that you've been in the seat of Parliament speaking to MPs and telling them about this stuff as well.
Well, who knows whether it's going to make much difference. But I mean, I think you've got to try everything and see where the energy is. I mean, a lot of the energy around this stuff is in local politics, for example. Like there's this really cool, it's, not so much amongst sort of high level members of parliament and cabinet ministers and that kind of stuff, but local political figures. Like in Japan, there's this super cool movement called Future Design, which I really love. And what they do is they invite local citizens to planning meetings about their own towns and cities, but they divide them into 2 groups. And the first group are told that they're citizens from the present day. And the second group are given these like almost ceremonial robes to wear and told to imagine themselves as citizens from the year 2060. And it turns out the citizens from 2060 come up with much more radical plans for their local towns, whether it's in healthcare or environmental policy. And, so for example, the citizens of the present might say, oh, we don't want to increase the water rates, even though we've got a crappy water infrastructure and we're going to run out of water in 20 years. But the people from 2060 are happy to do it because they know they want their grandchildren to have, water that's decent when they turn on the tap. And this movement is spreading across town planning in Japan. And it's like a citizen assembly kind of thing. And I think it could spread across UK and Europe and other places because it makes people feel involved in their futures. But it takes a bit of putting on a ceremonial kimono almost to do it.
Oh, yeah, I'll put on a ceremonial kimono. I mean,
I'm sure you look great.
Well, in the kind of, I think it's pretty much the week that all our kind of property planning laws and permissions are being completely overhauled. That's what we should be bringing in, really, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. And it would take brave governments to do it at a national level, but progressive towns and cities can be doing this. And, I think I wouldn't be surprised if this kind of decision making was more, quite common in this country, in the UK, in 10 years' time. You might start with small towns doing it, but then you'll get somewhere like Manchester doing it, or a London mayor might say, hey, yeah, why don't we try this crazy Japanese thing and imagine ourselves at 2060 and make plans for what our city should be like.
And what about your own life, Roman? I have an image of you living the good life in Oxford, surrounded by herbs and plants, not switching the heating on until November the 30th. And, what's it like?
Well, whenever I've written my books, I've always written them because there's an issue that I'm personally struggling with. So, I wrote a book about empathy because I thought I wasn't very good at it. And I've written a book about, being a good ancestor because I think, well, maybe I'm not a very good ancestor. I'm just involved in my own life. I'm worried about, whether it's what's going on with my books or family life and stuff like that. So, on some level, my life looks quite idyllic. I make my living as a writer. I get to do what I like, write the kind of books that I like. And I feel really lucky that I can do that. And I do have solar power panels on my roof, but I have to turn on the heating on about September the 1st, I think, because my kids like having mammoth long showers and I can't stop them. But that's fine. So, but, I think certainly I also do like these adventures with trying to connect with different time in everyday life. So I love going with my kids, to go and visit ancient trees, and go and climb up an old yew tree that's 1,000 years old. Or next week, I'm actually off on holidays with my kids to the Dorset coast, and we'll be looking for fossils. And undoubtedly, we'll be holding in our hands a 200 million year old fossil of some kind, some little ammonite squid-like creature. And, when you hold one of those things in your hand, you stare at it in wonder, and it makes you think about, it gives you a new perspective, really. It makes you think more about the past and care more about the future. So I think if we can bring this stuff into everyday life, it would be good for us.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, Roman, what is one book that you would recommend and one tip for living with more energy, vitality and motivation?
Well, my one book is not going to be Viktor Frankl's Man's Search for Meaning. I'm a sci-fi addict, and the sci-fi book that I'm obsessed with at the moment is called Aurora by Kim Stanley Robinson. And it's about 2,000 people who are sent out to colonize another planet, but they have to live for multiple generations on this starship to get there because it will take them 200 years. And the book's about how they manage to live together and how they manage to live within the sort of biological capacity of the ship and grow all the food that they need and all that kind of stuff and not use too many resources and stay within the boundaries of the ship. And that's what we need to do as a planet. And I just find that a mind-blowing book. It gives me huge sort of energy. And in terms of a tip for energy and vitality, there's this little trick that I like using for extending our time horizons, which I find really mind-blowing. And it's simply this: when you're writing the date and when you're writing the year, just put a 0 in front of the year. So the year now is 02020, 2020. And if you look at it immediately with the 0 in front, you've got a clock, a calendar, which can go on for tens of thousands of years. And it just puts life in perspective. At least for me, it makes me almost worry less about my own obsessions and my own problems and have that bigger perspective that we need.
That's brilliant. Yeah, I love that. Roman, it's been lovely to talk to you. When you were talking about sci-fi there, I was thinking of a book that we did for a Zestology book club, which was The Humans by Matt Haig. which is set in Oxford. I don't know if you've read it.
I haven't read it, but I've read some other Matt Haig books, and he's brilliant. So I'm going to go and get that this afternoon. Sounds
It's kind of a cross between sci-fi and comedy, and in kind of inspirational as well. And obviously set in your home patch, so I think you'd like it. Thanks so much for coming on Zestology. Where can people find the book? I'm presuming the book is everywhere, and where can people find out more about you?
Yeah, you can find the book everywhere, and you can go to if you can spell my name, you can go to my website, romankrznaric.com or goodancestorproject.com, or find me at Twitter at Roman Krznaric. Say hello, send me questions, and I'll send you back an answer in 280 characters or less.
Great. And listen, thanks for the book. I'm loving reading it. And as I said, I've been reading it today in the sunshine. It's really good and very thought-provoking, so thank you.
Well, thanks so much for having me on Zestology. It's been great fun.
That is it. Thank you for listening to Zestology. I'm still here in the blue zone. It's lovely. I'm going to stop banging on about it because it might even be making you jealous. But honestly, it was a brilliant decision to come here, and we've had a really lovely time. And you feel like the people here, they really need it in terms of their economy as well. And in terms of us, well, as I said, I've been swimming 3 times a day. And one of the things I love about that, going in the sea 3 times a day, is all the natural magnesium you're getting from the seawater. And seamless link, as you know, this podcast is sponsored by Magnesium Breakthrough, because it's not always that we can swim in the sea 3 times in a day. So if you're not swimming in the sea 3 times today, go for Magnesium Breakthrough, all 7 forms of supplemental magnesium. It's a brilliant product. And if you head to bioptimizers.co.uk or bioptimizers.com and use the code Zestology10, you will get 10% off. That's well worth it. I'm just about to go and get a bit of a dose of magnesium in the sea, but thank you for listening. And before I go, I've got a question. Obviously, we've talked about the blue zone and the longevity diet, which is, essentially, as far as I can tell, certainly Dale Bredesen and Walter Lungo both tend to say the same kind of thing. Lots of veggies on your plate, lots of olive oil, small amounts of protein and not too many carbs, and you'll be doing well, and lots of healthy fats. And I have a question for them, and that is, because I feel like I've been eating that here, the question is though, is feta cheese part of the longevity diet? Because I have been eating a lot of that, and I will be eating some of that tonight as well. Oh, I'm very inspired to cook with it when I'm home as well. There's a lot of healthy Greek salads going on here. Look, thank you for listening to this podcast, the intro of which has been brought to you from the Blue Zone. I am sitting in a slight ant's nest, sheltering behind this wall. So I'm going to say goodbye now. I'll be back in London next week. And thanks for listening. See you next week.